Let's start with the first benchmark. Here we test the editing in the viewport. The benchmark simulates the situation as if you were working normally with the Unreal Engine. All tested cards do their job in 1080p. The 6600 XT already reaches its limits here, but the 4070 and 7800 XT have a clear FPS advantage. If we set the viewport resolution to 1440p, we see that we need at least a 4060 Ti to be able to work smoothly. In the viewport, you should achieve at least an average of 30 frames per second for comfortable work. If you want to work on a 4K monitor or a 1440p monitor in the full screen viewport, you should at least use a 7800 XT or 4070. In the second benchmark, we test the viewport with 4K textures and cinematic settings. 10.2 GB of VRAM is used by the card. All cards with only 8 GB have massive frame drops. If we lower the settings to Epic, only 7 GB of VRAM is required, then the cards that only have 8 GB run smoothly at 30 frames per second. Next we come to the visual effects benchmark. Here we ran a 10-second animation in the viewport. All cards can deliver a good result. The 7800 XT is slightly better than the 4070 in this case. In the Electric Dreams benchmark, we test the FPS in the finished project in native 1080p resolution. Here we see that 60 FPS is not possible without DLSS or FSR. In this benchmark scene, the cards reach their limits even though we only set a resolution of 1080p. I hope to create many more videos for you in the future, so it would be fantastic if you could show your support by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support through likes and subscriptions is the most effective way to help the channel grow. The 4060 Ti with 8 GB has problems with cinematic settings because the video memory is simply not enough to store all assets. If we set the settings to Epic, which doesn't make much difference to the quality, we get the same frame rate as the 16 GB model. We have a very large project here that takes a long time to compile. The values are given in seconds, how long the project took to load. Here we see that the processors with multiple cores work significantly faster. For large projects, a strong CPU can save a lot of time. The 5800X has the best price-performance ratio. In the middle class, I would choose the 7800X3D. If you have more money at your disposal, you should go for the 7900X3D or the 7950X3D. In a smaller project, we see that it remains relatively identical in percentage terms. Here you can see that you can also work well with the Ryzen 5600X for normal projects. The time savings here are no longer that great. Next we test how the CPU affects the frame rate in the viewport. You're probably wondering whether the CPU affects your FPS, and the answer is yes, of course it does. Just not as much like in finished games, it always depends on the resolution you're working with. At 1080p we see that you can get slightly more frames with more powerful CPUs. Here it is mainly the graphics card that limits the frames. Unfortunately, I don't have a 4090 available, which might look different. In 1440p resolution, the frames are almost identical. The CPU only minimally influences the frames in the viewport. If you value more frames in the viewport, it makes more sense to get a more powerful GPU. In 4K, we had the same frame rate everywhere, which is why I didn't list this test here.